Good afternoon, and welcome to the RESES ID seminar, the first in our series of seminars for interdisciplinary dialogue. We are thrilled to have you all here today as we kick off this seminar series, which is a part of our new Argumenta project, Rethinking the Serviceability of Economics to Society, in short, RESES. The project is funded by the Finnish Cultural Foundation. RESES project is the, so to say, public face of our research project, which is called Economics as Serviceable Social Knowledge, in short, ESK, which is funded by the Academy of Finland. My name is Emrah Aydinonat. I'm a philosopher of economics working at TINT, Center of Philosophy of Social Science at the University of Helsinki. I am also the leader of the RESES project. We are excited to have two esteemed speakers with us today who will share their knowledge and insights. Our first speaker is Anni Huhtala, an expert in environmental and resource economics and policy. She has a PhD from the University of California, Berkeley, and her research investigates the impacts of risks, uncertainty, and intertemporal timeframes on individual and societal decision-making in environmental, energy, and climate policy. Anni has extensive experience in the international development of environmental accounting and welfare measurement and evaluation of economic and interdisciplinary research. Anni is a member of the Finnish Society of Sciences and Letters and the Secretary General of the Finnish Economic Policy Council. Our second speaker, the discussant, is Eeva Furman, the Chief Specialist at the Prime Minister's Office and the Secretary General of Finland's Commission for Sustainable Development. Before her current assignment, Eeva worked for most of her career at the Finnish Environment Institute. Her background is in marine biology, and her research interests include governance of sustainable development, sustainability, transformation, planetary health and well-being, science policy society interlinkage, environmental evaluation, biodiversity knowledge systems, co-creation, and active citizenship. Before we start, I should note that we will be recording the seminar today, not however that we will not record the discussion at the end of the seminar, with the hope that this will create a more relaxed environment for dialogue. So there is no need to worry that your comments will be published online and haunt you for the rest of your life. We hope that talks from Anni and Eeva will spark thought-provoking conversations during our general discussion. Once again, thank you for being a part of our seminar, and we hope that you find this experience both informative and engaging. So without further ado, I'd like to give the floor to Anni Huhtala. Thanks, Anni.
Thank you very much, and thanks for inviting me to this seminar series. The title is about natural capital, and to be short, what natural capital is, that it covers nature and all the environment. So that's what natural capital is about. And I realized that in my presentation, I basically try to give you a flavor of what environmental economics is, and then how it could contribute to viable economic policy making in certain environmental issues. But I have some 20 slides, and you can imagine that it's not easy to tell everything about this subdiscipline, but let me see whether I have chosen. I have tried to choose some topical issues that you could get an idea that what we are doing when we are studying environment from economic point of view. So and now I cannot move the slide. It worked just a minute ago, but
is there something you can do to make sure that the window where you have the presentation is activated?
okay.
If you try to click on the presentation.
Yeah, that's what I try to do. Now, great, excellent. Now it moved. Perfect, Teemi. Okay, a little bit of history. So regarding nature and environment, so we could say perhaps or claim that the modern environmental movement in the US started after this influential book by Rachel Carson about Silent Spring. And that was about use of pesticides and what kind of harm they did for nature. And then I guess that the second thing that in public debate that had an impact on also economics profession is the Club of Rome report on the limits to growth. Economists were very skeptical about this pamphlet, perhaps you could call it, because they said that even though these problems were there, so in practice, in the economy, the pricing mechanism will help us so that the scarcity of resources will be alleviated by the fact that if there are scarce resources, the prices will increase and we do not have any problems any longer. If I simplify very much the idea, but it was heavily criticized. But then there were perhaps group of people who started taking more seriously about these environmental issues. And then it's said that this sub-discipline of environmental economics, it started about late 1960s. And people working in this area, it was convenient to have this history where we had writings of Picou some 100 years back, where he actually analyzed the problem of pollution. And then it's him to thank for the idea that these environmental problems as externalities should be solved partly by policy intervention, so that we would use environmental taxes, like carbon taxes. So that the environmental taxes are not that new idea if you think carefully how the world looked in 1920. So already then there were issues related to the environmental degradation. Then hoteling is about scarcity of resources and optimal use of non-renewable resources. And there has been contribution by Coase regarding that we do not necessarily need taxes, but if we have defined property rights, even to the environment properly, then the market mechanism or negotiation will take care of these externalities and problems related to that. But I'm not going to go back to this history, just give you an idea that there were these theoretical underpinnings that this sub-discipline was built upon. And then just reminding you that we do not know whether Malthus was an economist or anything else, but back in the history, economics was called the dismal science because these issues of scarcity and land use and fertility of land, and on the other hand, population growth were considered future problems. So there is a long history related to use of resources and scarcity of resources even in the area of resource economics. And of course, whole economics is about allocation, efficient allocation of resources. But then if we come back to today and the discussion about natural capital, so the influential report by Sir Partha Dasgupta that came out 2 years ago, he tried to make a point about this, that nature should be seen as an asset, and an asset that is comparable to for example, man-made capital, machines, factories, whatever. So that and because nature is an asset, so we should consider carefully how we are using it, and if we think about it as an asset, so nature is a kind of state of ecosystems and how well they are doing. And the problem becomes when we overexploit the capacity of nature to regenerate and provide us all these services that we are using, and perhaps we are not even figuring out that what kind of services we are using. And then in this economic jargon, these services are called ecosystem services. And because we get these services for free, we do not care about the state of the nature. What also Partha wanted to emphasize is that despite the fact that these services are provided for free, so it doesn't mean that nature wouldn't have any value without these services. So that just nature has an intrinsic value per se, and we should recognize that. So just to clarify a bit about this jargon, these ecosystem services, so in practice, what we can call for ecosystem services are this: drinking water, game pollinators, pest control, pollution filtration, erosion control, many kinds of services that we perhaps do not think about in everyday life. And this picture tries to illustrate that some services, they are just essential for human survival, like drinking water. But then some of them, like this bird watching, that's something that it's different kind of enjoyment and perhaps not necessary. And if we think about the state of the environment and nature, so these bird watching trips may be quite harmful to the environment if people are flying around the globe to watch these rare species. But there are a multitude of services that we are enjoying. And becoming biodiversity, that was a key issue in Dasgupta review, because this is something that we perhaps do not see. It's invisible, but even more important, because biodiversity, and here I have listed what kind of diversity it can be: genetic, species, so ecological diversity. But basically the idea is that this biodiversity makes it possible for nature to be productive, and that's why it's resilient and adaptable. And that's why, perhaps because the nature has been so resilient, we do not recognize that perhaps we are overloading or overusing nature and its services. And this is the only figure from the Dasgupta review that I wanted to show you. So that the main message is that natural capital is an asset, and it's as important as these other sources of wealth. And here we see that typically we think as an asset and capital, this produced capital. But then also we have human capital. And these two, produced capital and human capital, are perhaps those types of capital that we normally use in or think in economics when we think about assets. But Dasgupta's message was as much as is for everyone, so it's also for fellow economists, the kind of reminder that nature could be considered as an asset as well. But why? I mean, in economics discipline, so why it's so important to consider it as a stock of capital and wealth. So in our modeling, so when we have these stock variables, then we think about dynamics. And then regarding resources and the environment, it's important this we take into account these dynamics over time, so that it's not only this static states where we are now, but things develop over time, and that's why this extraction of stock of resources is important as a dynamic problem. And sure, it's related to this capacity of nature to regenerate and sustain the life. And here again, the thing is that because these are dynamic processes, they may occur slowly or more quickly, but that could be a problem, that we do not recognize that something is happening, something harmful, and it's then when we enter the over exploitation, then perhaps we cannot do anything any longer, but the harm will be overwhelming for all of us. So this stock of capital makes us think about that, how much of resources can be extracted and how much can the environment be polluted. And these basically are the two major concerns that we have in human-nature interactions. On the other hand, we have this degradation of the environment and then depletion of natural resources. And now I try to exemplify a bit that what does environmental economics have to say about these issues. So pollution, how it should be controlled. So if you look typical textbooks in economics, so the problem is that we have externalities, so that we have when we consume or produce something, there will be these harmful byproducts, and these are called externalities, like pollutants. And one way to take care of this problem is that we should price these externalities. So pollution should have a price, and when it's expensive to pollute, then there would be technological development or something that we would take care of the fact that there wouldn't be that much pollution because it would be expensive. This is a long story, and the literature is full of modeling that how this would happen in theory and practice, but basically in theory this is very much okay. This is what could be done, but also in practice we have examples where this pricing has worked. So that regarding this acute problem of climate change and carbon emissions, so Finland introduced a carbon tax in 1990, one of the first countries, if not the first one. And currently also we have an emission trading system for carbon. And then even though it took quite a long time to get this system established, so still I think that it's rather amazing that we have an international emission trading system in place. And it seems to be working as well, because there are studies which have confirmed that those firms that have to buy these carbon allowances and are part of this trading system, they have successfully reduced their emissions compared to those that are not forced to be part of this system and still get these emissions allowances for free. But then if we take this example seriously, and then actually there are quite many pollutants, and this is related to this biodiversity, so that there are people who are saying that climate change is an easy problem to not easy, but in practice, in theory, to be solved, because we just need to price carbon and then the problem is taken care of. And then the problem with biodiversity is that we do not know what to do, that we do not have a similar pricing mechanism that would work out for us. But that's not basically true, because when we pollute the environment, then we will have an impact on biodiversity, and we are degrading the resilience of nature with all these possible pollutants. And here the practical problem becomes, because basically all these possible pollutants should be priced optimally. And then here I'm just listing where I found in the page of US Environment Protection Agency some pollutants that are measured and they are monitored, and they are these are just few, but there are air pollutants, water pollutants, heavy metals, and then in theory we should price all of this, so that would take care of the problem of externalities, because all these pollutants would have price, and then there would be incentives to try to minimize the amount of pollutants generated in production, for example. And the list of harmful chemicals, it goes on and on. And then there certainly would be some transaction costs or costs related to regulation if we try to carefully price all these pollutants and figure out how harmful they are, and what would be the optimal price or tax that should be put on those pollutants. And because that's a bit problematic, so in practice we see that instead of pricing these pollutants, as economists suggest, so we regulate them. And one way of regulation is this, that we have started to measure and monitor these pollutants, so that it's not without cost either, that we have this kind of monitoring system. And then there are these limits how much these pollutants can be generated, and then there is this regulation, especially in the richer part of the world, that we have wastewater treatment systems, and that's also regulated. But somehow we are kind of with this regulation we are lagging behind, because this technological development, the byproduct is that there are new and new substances invented, and because there are increasing amounts of chemicals used, and the problem is that oftentimes we just figure out afterwards how harmful they are. And for example, DDT and asbestos are good examples of those. So that intervening in practice can also be problematic, even though we would have a careful regulation. But as long as we do not know enough of these pollutants, we can't regulate them. Okay, that was the environmental degradation part. So that there are challenges with the pricing if we try to apply it everywhere, so that we could save and conserve biodiversity. But then another aspect was this depletion of natural resources. And then one topical issue is related today to these rare earth elements. And interestingly, these are not so rare. And it's not a coincidence that China has become the largest producer of these rare earth elements. These elements, they are there in the Earth's crust almost everywhere, but they are in so minuscule amounts that it's very expensive to extract them. And then one reason why China has become dominant in these markets is because they have lower operational costs in the industry that is extracting these resources. And part of the problem why the costs are so low is that perhaps we are not caring, and not even Chinese government, about those who are working in these mines and who are exposed to these environmental risks when these elements are mined and processed. And then in that sense, we have kind of voluntarily outsourced these problems to China. And now that the geopolitical situation has changed, we have started thinking about this more carefully. But as long as it wasn't our problem that harvesting these resources is expensive and environmentally not so clean industry, so we didn't care, perhaps. So the typical answer to these problems, so that when we figure out that there are scarce resources, so we just look in the history and okay, there has always been this technological development and new inventions and cleaner technology. So could we trust on this, that this will save us also in the future? So when it comes to scarcity of resources, so basically the only limiting factor in the end is availability of energy. And we know where ultimately we have this external source. It's solar energy. But regarding this green transition, which tries to invent and use clean technologies, so what we have seen today is that it will require huge amounts of energy and electricity that should be clean. And what I have been rather optimistic myself for quite some long time. So I have thought that engineers can solve all these problems. Just you give them tools and then they will figure out how we solve this. But in the very end, should we think about, is there a thing like clean energy in the end? Because with current technology, solar energy requires so much other materials and resources, so that perhaps it's true that if we really invented this clean technology, so wouldn't we have this kind of perpetual motion machine basically? So that if, because it would mean that in the end, in one way or another, we wouldn't have any limits, and we would get these clean things for free. But then it is against the first and second laws of thermodynamics, so that we cannot increase amount of energy, but in the end we are left with less of it when even producing energy from solar or using solar power. But getting back to the earth and a bit more realistic, so I thought that I would show you a concrete example regarding Finland, because in Finland there has been public debate about this green transition, and we will have a hydrocarbon economy, so that just that we will have plenty of clean energy provided by wind power. We won't have any problems, but this actually will make our economies grow even more. And here is a figure that shows you the supply of electricity in Finland during the 50 years from 1970. And the total amount has increased, that we are somewhere where about 80 terawatt hours per year right now. And these other lines, they are previous projections, so that for example in 2000 it was projected that the electricity supply would increase to about 100 terawatt hours in 2020. Okay, we didn't quite get there. 10 years later, it was projected that we would have something like 90 terawatt hours, and then, as I said, now we are here. But we are still optimistic about these projections, that supply of electricity will increase. And one component why we were so optimistic about increase in the supply of electricity was nuclear power. But as we know, we are still waiting for additional nuclear power to come online. So we are here, and we were supposed to be here with the Olkiluoto third reactor some time back in history. And then we also were hoping that this jump would realize because of this Fennovoima. And we know that it's not going to come online in 5 years, or not even in 10 years. So now where we are very optimistic about this wind energy, it was hardly visible some 10 years back, but now it has increased, I would say, very considerably, and then the projections show that this wind power would increase. Could be. These are not totally unrealistic scenarios. The only problem so far is that we cannot store the wind power, so that it's kind of intermittent productions. And then, for example, today there is hardly any wind energy produced because it's not windy. And then regarding in general when you read the newspapers and these fancy stories that about this carbon-free future. So just to illustrate it, because one of the heavy pollutants in Finland is this establishment of plant in Rahe, SSAB, and then they have these great hopes regarding this production technology, so that they wouldn't need to use so much carbon, but instead they could use hydrogen in these processes. But then it's very much dependent on that there will be plenty of carbon-free electricity, like wind power. And just to show you that this one specific plant would require annually about 10 terawatt hours. And then you can imagine that what would happen if this hydrogen would be used more broadly in industrial processes. So at least in the short run, we have a challenge here. And then getting back to this idea about thermodynamics, so that as long as there isn't kind of fully clean way of producing energy, so perhaps there are some kind of limits on our lifestyle in the earth, in rich countries. I show that, I see that I have 3 minutes to go. So towards the end, I would like to remind you that even though you wouldn't be familiar with economics, so there have been different schools of thought and different ideas about what we should think about this limits to growth. And then to a certain extent, I would encourage people to look back and think carefully, even in this sub-discipline of environmental economics, about these issues that are there limits to growth or not? And then how far this technological development can save us. But on the other hand, there has been a lot of criticism of economics and economists that we model and think about people and their behavior in a very cynical way, so that when they are rational, they are also kind of self-interested and they are not altruists. They behave myopically. They don't think about the future, and they perhaps do not consider distributional issues, meaning distribution of income or whatever, so that what happens to me compared to the others. And but I'm not sure whether this is a cynical view of how we are as human beings. And that's why in the end I want to show you a couple of pictures regarding a good work carried out by economists when they have tried to value these damages. And here I underline that it's not pricing these damages, but putting value on damages. And there is a recent paper in Quarterly Journal of Economics, which is kind of very highly appreciated journal in economics discipline, so that every good scientist would like to publish in that journal, and very, very rare people can do that. But these guys, they have been publishing this work in that journal, and they make a point about distribution of income and distribution of impacts from environmental degradation. And I would like to explain this figure to you very shortly, but the point here is that they have tried to map the mortality effects of climate change, and this concerns year 2100. And here you see that how the climate change, if it proceeds as far as that there would be 4 degrees of Celsius average temperature increase in the globe. And these blue areas, we see that mortality would decrease, so that this climate that has warmed would have positive contribution to these areas. And the south, poor south, if you like, would have the negative impacts. We do not need to go into details how this study has been carried out and details here. I hope that you check the paper later if you are interested in. But basically, you see here the impacts. So that positive up in the north and negative in the south. And this is a final figure from their study. So that basically what they show that these impacts, when you look very poor countries like Somalia, so the deaths increase and the adaptation costs increase. USA decrease in deaths, but also in adaptation costs increase, meaning that these climates that are colder now, when they get warmer, the mortality impacts decrease because or thanks to warmer climate. And here again, when we have this temperature distribution, Ghana, Accra, we see that mortality increases quite dramatically. Whereas if we are very close here in Oslo, Norway, so because there will be a smaller number of days with very cold climates, deaths decrease, but then there are increasing adaptation costs. And I guess that these figures perhaps very good at showing that why kind of economists as social scientists would care about this degradation of environment and what kind of impacts are. So that if the distribution of the harmful impacts will be like shown and that this study, perhaps we understand why rich countries are a bit reluctant regarding policies that are expensive to combat climate change, because perhaps we are not the one who will suffer, even though we are the ones who have perhaps created this problem using extensively fossil fuels. So to summarize all these things, and I think that this perhaps it's hard to see that what has been the logic in my presentation, because there have been so many issues that I tried to touch upon. But the thing is that there could be something positive in economics in pointing out these environmental problems and trying to provide solution. Oftentimes these solutions are perhaps not practical, like taxing all the possible externalities. But then we also have theories that we shouldn't hesitate to use these bans and restrictions where we see that there are high risks and high uncertainty. And then we need international cooperation. And this is my last slide, kind of afterward, regarding kind of economics as a discipline and sub-discipline of environmental economics in itself, so that I guess that what is great about environmental economics is that we have always worked in interdisciplinary environment, because we have to know something about the ecology and chemistry and physics and all these natural sciences, where we can see that where these problems are created. But then also regarding human behavior, I guess that we have become a bit more humble about what are the findings in psychology and social psychology when we try to study preferences and how we behave as human beings. So that I guess that there are some good and positive things about economics in the end, even though sometimes we can be very skeptical whether the economics is useful at all. So thank you.
Thank you very much for this great presentation. Now we have Eeva Furman, who will give her comments on this talk. Eeva, thanks, and the floor is yours.
Thank you. Can you hear me well?
Yes.
Good. Yes, so firstly, thanks very much for the invitation here, and it's wonderful to see Recess functioning in full force here. It's a very important project in many ways. And Anni, thanks for your presentation. It was very much what we have been discussing before, and there isn't that many issues that I, in a way, would have something to contradict with it. Maybe the one where you really raised the role of energy as the limiting source in technology going forward is for me a little bit strange to see it only from the energy point of view, when we also have big deficiencies, and especially links with biodiversity from the material and raw material and natural resources perspective. But I thought that my role here is more like bringing a different angle to the discussions and approach the issue of the topic of natural capital, and why should we care from the side of ecology, and maybe also take some cultural perspective to this that Anni brought up in her presentation of the societal and human perspective to that, and also from the side of operationalization and the use of this kind of understanding and scientific input from natural capital and ecosystem services, both in governance as well as management. So the talk that Anni gave, she built it on two different dimensions, and I see them a little bit separate, and I will approach them that way as well. So the first one is about natural capital, and then the second one is that why should we care about it? So if we think about the natural capital, and Anni used this definition by Dasgupta in her talk, but it of course has a much longer history. So the last sentence was that nature should be understood as an asset, and this use of asset came up many times in your talk. And when I see the use or understanding of nature as an asset to human, I see it a little bit, or not so little, but I see it quite problematic. It kind of starts from the idea that humans are owners of the planet, because the life on planet actually is built of the environment and ecosystems. Humans are part of the life on the earth, and we are connected actually through evolution to every single species and every single individual of every single species. So can we really own nature or other species or other individuals from other species in the same way that we can say that they are assets? Can we say that children or brothers or cousins are our assets? So if you think that there are 8.7 million species on Earth, and humans are one of these, and still we use 30% of resources and actually leave 60% to the 8.6 plus million species. We have succeeded also to become 96% of the mammal biomass with our own bodies and our pets and livestock. And there is wildlife only 4% of this biomass on the earth. So are we in the process and succeeded already to drive, and we have already started to, in a way, to drive huge proportions of species into extinction and do that continually. So we have decided that certain parts of natural capital practically belongs to us. That's the areas like timber, there are somebody owning timbers and so forth, businesses and humans and institutions and countries. But also the commons, the environmental commons, they are not owned by anyone, but still the whole civilization seems to own them. So this all explains that we are really living in an Anthropocene and we are the owners of this planet. And so it really raises very philosophical questions like, why did we give up slavery? And why did all countries in the world, or at least those members of the United Nations, agree that Agenda 2030 for Sustainable Development is the compass for human civilization? So can't we really do a little bit better also and stop thinking that we own this planet? So I'm sorry I had to start with this because it's very crucial when we start talking about natural capital in its definition as it is. But as we saw in this Dasgupta's reference to natural capital, we can see that it's actually, there are more elements, and that's why I would like to do as Don Camillo usually says, Father Don Camillo, that they are always the other side of the coin. And the other side of the coin is why actually to care about this sun, and that's the Anni's second point of her heading, and this is the story that she was very much talking about, these challenges that we are having from economic growth, from present lifestyle, highly efficient food, energy, urbanization, production, consumption, processing, our lifestyle, health and education systems, and so forth. They have all brought us as well-being and will bring us in the future, but they also have these side effects that are really affecting negatively, directly our well-being and the future generations. And they are those issues like inequalities that we saw in the last slides, where from 2100 in human societies, we have the mental problems, stress, and many social challenges, and also physical health problems. And these are so often connected to the issue that actually humans, with this present way of providing us well-being, we actually break the capacity of ecosystems to provide these ecosystem services, which we depend on. And so we actually, instead of weakening the provision of ecosystem services, we also turn them to provide us these services. So it's not only a question of losing the ecosystem services, but also receiving these services, which can be, for example, tipping points that Anni mentioned. And these are very extreme cases. Everyone's talking about tipping points because they are usually connected like with a black future, that everything will collapse and then it's the end of the story, or the world suddenly becomes something totally different. But I would say that the worse is actually these smaller and larger problems that we are experiencing all the time, that are causing destruction in human well-being and our societal systems that break down. And these are like, for example, that we are causing destruction to tropical forests, and these open opportunities for viruses such as COVID, because the ecosystems have their own control systems. And when humans in a way break these ecosystems, the control systems break down, and this allows deleterious species to expand and then also cause harm for humans. But it's also like issues where climate change is moving ticks towards the north, where they don't have any species that are controlling them, or we bring pets to other continents and there are no control systems from the system, the ecosystem taking care of them. So we should really pay attention to something called nature-based solutions, where we take into account that when we are solving problems in our societies, we really pay attention to these. So these are all signals that we are right now getting all the time from school books, reports, news, politics. We have the elections, they are talking about that. And this is why actually we need natural capital to actually pay attention why to care about it. So if we need to care, what is then the concept we could use for taking care of the nature? And the first one was the intrinsic value that I a little bit opened at the beginning, and that one didn't work out. That was Carlson in 1962 actually tried to wake us up, but it didn't really work out. And then we had the Brundtland Commission that actually led to the first Agenda 2030, and here she talked about, Brundtland was the Prime Minister in Norway, and she brought up with her group the idea that we make compromises between environment and economic growth and social needs. But of course, we can't make a compromise of these three. It just what Anni was talking about is leaving out the externalities. So we had only economic growth, but not really filling the environmental and social needs. And so we had the Kate Rawford's donut model, which is now maybe closest of the way of actually taking care of this. A donut model has the kind of planetary boundaries around it, and then in the core, it has again the social kind of capacity that we are needing. So I see that this one really leads us with the fact that we need to, in a way, take into account the system that we have in the society and bringing the values, and not pricing, but values, making the damages visible, as Anni said, but also I would say that also make the value and make value visible about the positive solutions, positive paths, and estimates if damages had not been used. And these valuations are not only economic, but there is lots of integrated methodology by science that was brought up when actually ecosystem services, which were originally very much a tool for economists and natural scientists, but when the policy and social scientists came in, it also brought this voice and discussion with individuals or with societal other actors, those that are really at stake in different situations, and then also gave the natural science perspective to the evaluation, what should be taken into account. So Anni was bringing up these different understanding mechanisms that we should use to be able to actually control these natural science negative sides, but like putting taxes and bans and restrictions, it all sounds really nice, but when we are in democracies, then we really need to make sure that we get a broader framing, because otherwise we get backlashes. First, we have a government that is really supporting this. The next government is very much against it. And that's why we really need to bring in different kind of issues. And I will finish my talk by bringing in this, in a way, sustainability policy framework to bring up these issues. And the first one is the international diplomacy. It's not only the between governments, like intergovernmental one, but it's also on private level to build like new kind of rules of dealing issues on international level when we are actually having the whole planet different flows going in and out, so our economies are not country specific. The second one is that we really need a framework for the entire society, which links the nature with other goods in the society, how we bring and foster the well-being of both humans and planet. And in Finland, for example, we have the Commission of Sustainable Development, which is bringing in the different societal actors. It's a continuous process of discussion, and its strategy really builds on a systems level approach, where we look at systems like food system and other kind of systems that really build on that, build on how we can get well-being by taking into account the requirements of both nature and then the social dimensions. And then we also need very much knowledge-based assessments for government and cities and businesses and actually private persons to understand what is happening with the state, the progress and scenarios. And here it is very important to have something like natural capital, but also human capital, cultural capital, social capital and so forth, brought in together, make different valuations of these and bring them forth when the governments are making budgets, giving budget to different ministries, to different actions, different policies. So the final and most important is the cultural transformation. This is the most difficult because when we do decisions, it's very much elitistic. And because of that, we really need to include the entire society and have participation, redefining our relationship with nature and fostering active citizenship and education. So I would like to close with how I started with this issue of actually the having nature as a source of value or asset, that it is really important that we mentally remarry with nature. And we can, I would like to give you to think about after this commentary, that what is actually the economic cost of having moral and ethical challenges in the society that are causing their own pressures on people and our societies. So thank you. I'll stop here.
Thanks, Eeva. Anni, maybe you want to respond before we go to the audience questions?
Yeah, thanks, Eeva. So many issues we could discuss. But first comment to all of you. So read the Dasgupta review. It's 600 pages, but it's worth of time spent because it's very rich in its methods and describing these problems. And I do harm if I try to simplify too much the messages, because Dasgupta discusses very much about social norms, how we are as human beings, our morals, about these distributional issues, and kind of understanding human behavior. So I think that in a sense it's a atypical economics text, even though Dasgupta himself says that in a sense he has written the review for other economists, and that's why he is using our language, and that's why he is talking about nature as an asset, because asset is a positive thing for us. It's something that's worth investing and taking care of. So that's mainly that it's a positive connotation, but also that it's something that brings us to think about a bit longer run, this dynamics, so that we can deplete this asset totally and nothing is left, and then we are gone, if I simplify. So that's why, and because an asset, so it may take time to deplete that asset, and that's why we see these problems, because we still are kind of able to use this asset, but we do not see that we are losing it. So that I would, because I'm an economist, I see positively this phrasing of nature as an asset, but it has a good reason. But I can see that it may sound strange for non-economists. But I guess that the very idea tries to be positive, and there is no claim that human beings would own this asset. On the contrary, so that as Eeva said, we have these common property resources, commons, and economics is saying that that's a problem, because we do not have these property rights. So we do not care about these free, so-called free resources. So I guess that there, some of these issues we could discuss more carefully, and it would take some time to understand the logic of economics, and kind of also these good causes, trying to explain why we are seeing this environmental degradation, even though every one of us appreciates the value of nature without putting a price tag on that. But then to come to this philosophical level, so I guess that economics, I think that related to this environmental issues. So I'm not sure, because it's important to understand human behavior, how we are doing and how we are making these decisions. And I guess that the older I get, the more I think that economics is pretty good at explaining in our theoretical models how self-interest and bad people we are. So that it's because economists are blamed that we do not appreciate that how good and well-behaving people we are. But in the end, what we see happening, so perhaps that's the truth. That's how we are. We do not stop until it's too late. But these are just kind of reflections so that to provoke you to continue on these lines.
Can I comment as well, Emrah?
Sure.
Of course.
Yeah. So of course I had to make a provocative, or I wanted to do it just to bring the whole width of the issues. But I must say that I think we have been talking so long now about ecosystem services and the kind of service way of thinking about nature that I wanted to really raise. I've been personally really, most of the research I've done before is about ecosystem services. So I know it quite well, but I think it was important that we keep it anyway in mind that not everything has a value. And actually I stopped by starting thinking that actually the economic value of really more and more living in a Anthropocene and strengthening this use of the not only biodiversity but everything around us. You can see that it's the mental problems we are having. There's a lot of it is connected to that with this next generation, and it can be also something alarming that we have here. But basically, I very much agree with you, and the Dasgupta report, I refer to it myself, so it was not actually about the report. I think it's fantastic that we have it, and there are those who don't want to read the 600, there are different kind of reports that in a way explain it, so it's a real bestseller. So thanks.
Thank you. Before we go to the audience discussion and stop the recording, for the record, I want to thank Anni and Eeva for their contribution and for their talks. I also want to thank everyone who joined and who will be asking questions in a moment. And I would like to especially thank to Teemu Lari, who arranged this meeting. So thanks everyone.